Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. He's Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald Times. Mind your manners, Postgame. We're going to keep this one quick. We got to go to Columbus in I guess, what, like 15 hours. Indiana 69, UNC Greensboro 58. Fair to say Mike Woodson did not think Indiana played particularly well tonight. He was not angry, but I would say forceful in his assessment of.
I think angry.
He wasn't ranting, was my point. Like,
well,
it wasn't.
I mean, it was unhinged, but I mean, I think he was not pleased with how they played. I mean, I'm looking for the quotes right here.
He talked about like the effort wasn't anywhere near good enough.
Being selfish as hell. We didn't play hard. That's unacceptable. Praised UNC Greensboro a couple of times, but I mean, I think that's angry.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like
Indiana didn't play well. I mean, and that's perfectly fair. 14 turnovers. Just 16 assists on 25 made baskets, shot under 42% from the floor. I thought made some, had a tough night from three, but I thought also just really did not finish well around the rim at all. The rebound disparity was, Indiana only out-rebounded UNC Greensboro by 5. That should have been much wider, I think, based on the size. It felt like UNC Greensboro, frankly, played this game after that opening stretch where I think Indiana was up 19-5. It felt like UNC Greensboro introduced a physicality that Indiana didn't handle well. And listen, they drew 20 fouls and they shot 16 free throws. So it's not like the officials were just letting everybody do everything. I just thought Indiana, especially in the post, especially around the rim, was not physical enough tonight. And that is 58 points, 31.7% from the floor, even 9 of 32 from three. Those are all perfectly acceptable defensive numbers in a game like this, but the rebounding was not good enough, and the offense just, when Woodson was talking about selfish, when he was talking about effort, I think he was talking about offense and rebounding mostly.
Yeah, and I asked my question, and he took it to be, so I asked him if, when you take this block of games, is he happy with the progress that the team's made? And he took it so I'm happy with the progress we've made since our first practice. You should have seen our first practice. A, I couldn't have seen the first practice because they don't let us on any practice. And B, that's not what I'm interested in would be to know how he views this 4-game block, because this was a very segmented part of the season. I feel like the Bahamas with the next part, and then after that when they get back, and it's like he's blasted their effort, or just been unhappy with their effort in 2 of the games. To start at the one game, who did they play? I can't remember.
Eastern Illinois, the first half against Eastern Illinois,
and so now I blast effort in this game. South Carolina, I thought was an exception. They played really well throughout sort of that whole game. So, what does he feel like? Does he feel like they made progress offensively? Because I think there's been, like you said, there's moments, but I don't know. I feel like the good has outweighed the bad through 4 games. And
I think it has. Number one,
and defensively, I sort of think it's a push almost, where I feel like their talent has been good enough where they can kind of get by, and
they've got to rebound the ball better.
They got to rebound the ball better.
For the size and athleticism they have, even when they play smaller, they've got to rebound the ball better, especially if you're not going to be a high-volume three-point shooting team. You can't let the other team steal extra possessions. UNC Greensboro only had 10 second chance points. They had 17 offensive rebounds in this game. That is too many. Now, we saw this game sometimes last year, the complexion of teams that come in and shoot a ton of threes. That creates a lot of long rebounds, weird rebounds. I get that. But
one team they're just able to hang around if they could just double what Indiana shoots because the
right
3-pointers. That's an easy strategy against this team, and it feels like it still works.
But I will say we saw this last year. High major teams don't do that. Low and mid major teams do it because they feel like they've got to find some way to gum it up and kind of game the system. And again, defensively speaking, I'm scrolling over here to UNC Greensboro statistics. These are, 0.906 points per possession is a perfectly acceptable number.
Yeah.
The big talking point defensively is rebounding, which is I think where Woodson was talking about effort. I think it was less about the way Indiana defended, even defending the 3, more about the rebounding number, and Indiana should have been closing out more of those possessions. And there are going to be nights, I think it's fair to say, even as good as this team can be offensively, there are also just going to be nights when the shots aren't falling. Mackenzie Ibaka was 2 of 11 from the floor. Again, I didn't think Malik Renew. I don't think we've really seen a vintage Malik Renew game since the Tennessee exhibition.
Yeah.
And hey, tonight was the first game he hasn't scored in double figures. So, I don't think he's been terrible. And he also had 10 rebounds and 3 assists. But you're not getting kind of your automatics, from, only 2 scores in double figures for a team that's had 5 in double figures multiple times already this season.
Yeah.
You have to defend your way through games like this. And in fairness, I remember saying this back in the summer when the schedule came out. This is the sort of game I was a little bit surprised Indiana put on its schedule, because UNC Greensboro is in that weird sort of, that vague region between like a quality opponent and a team that you can just sort of goose all your metrics against.
Well, Mike Jones is a good coach. I covered him a bit at Radford,
yeah.
And he made the tournament a couple times.
They were picked. They've won a lot in their recent history. This is where Wes Miller was before he went to Cincinnati, and they were picked, I think, second in their conference. Like, this isn't a bad team. It's sort of one of those games where it's like, you'd like to see Indiana play better. Okay, maybe we get to January, February, and Indiana got a harder.
I feel like you haven't answered my question. Like, so offensively, this 4-game block, are you surprised that they've been this labored most of the time, with, I think, the exception being South Carolina? And in terms of,
they had 90. They broke 90.
They broke 80 points, but it doesn't look. I don't know. It's looked.
I think the offense looked fine against SIU Edwardsville. I thought it looked good against Eastern Illinois. South Carolina was weird because of the way that the game got broken up by fouls. This was the first time that I really thought Indiana lost its way offensively. And listen, again, that's going to happen sometimes. And so, as I was saying before, I was rudely interrupted.
Well, you're just meandering. I posed a question. You didn't answer.
To be fair, we got a big game this weekend. Our focus was elsewhere.
No, you got to focus on tomorrow's not given.
Tomorrow's a concept.
Tomorrow's a concept.
He never said tomorrow's not a given.
Well, if it's a concept, it's not given.
That's kind of heavy, though, right? Like, tomorrow's not a given.
I think that's the same thing of what tomorrow's a concept means.
The weather's bad out there tonight. Tomorrow's not a given.
But like,
you're going to have some nights like this, and if Indiana gets to January and February, and maybe a more honest look at some of its warts was better for this team in November, then fine. And I would say this is not like the Army game last year. This is not like the Florida Gulf Coast game. This is a better team. Indiana played better through some of its struggles.
You give them such leeway.
I don't think I do.
You're so positive. Well, let's get into this bench thing, because like they had the momentum. Well, no, I think it's worth talking about.
I just like the way what you called it.
They were up 19-3, I think it was. 19-5. A couple minutes later, they sub out. They do their mass substitutions. Go to the bench, 4 guys, immediately have a scoring drought, I think 1 of 7, and that sort of gives, he said they gave him hope. Mike Woodson is afraid.
Yeah.
They gave them hope, and that did sort of feel like it, where like they weren't in the game at all. They had 7 points in the first 11 minutes, and then the bench sort of, cools it down, and then the starters have a hard time sort of ramping back up again. In the second half, they haven't had these problems, even though they've gone to similar lineups with 3 guys on the bench. But I think it's A, they're in a rhythm finally of the game, and B, they've staggered it a little more, so they're not going all at once. So Galloway comes in, Tucker comes in.
It's more like in the first half, the substitutions are sort of pre-planned, and in the second half, it's much more based on game state and who's playing well. So we didn't see as much Trey Galloway tonight. This is the lowest minutes number I think he's had in the regular season.
But he still staggered him out in the second half
as well. But I think that's because Trey Galloway wasn't playing well, whereas Bryson Tucker plays 25 minutes off the bench. He plays more than McKenzie and Baco. And I think that's Mike Woodson looking at it and saying, hey, McKenzie and Baco just doesn't have it tonight.
But why can't you
missed all 4 shots in the second half, whereas Tucker. But I think the point for Mike Woodson is, I get your point to a point. I think his counter, if he were here, would be, but I got to find ways to get that bench going, because I can't live the whole season without it.
I don't understand why you can't just be slightly more strategic and get the bench going in the first half.
Well, let me ask you then, what, and this is not one of those, like, you didn't play the game, you don't know what's going on, but like, how would you do it?
Trey Galloway for Carlisle, 16.5. Get him going for a few minutes. Then maybe sub him back in.
So maybe go to the bench a little earlier, but not
staggered. And then Tucker comes in a couple minutes after that, and you can play him. And then you kind of mix in.
I think you can tinker with some of that, that specifically makes a lot of sense, and might be one thing Woodson just feels like he can't do with Galloway yet because of his minutes restrictions.
Sure,
but I think that
you can play him as a burst in the first half, and it's not like they haven't had time to work they've had vast amounts of time between games, which is why I feel like there's no sort of counter argument like, well, we couldn't work this in, or what. They've had 5 days before almost every game, 4 days before almost every game this season. So it's not like they haven't had time to work on these things. I just don't know why I do it, because like you said, they gave them hope, and it sort of kickstart. Maybe they would have come back anyway. I don't know. I just feel like it's been 4 games where this has kind of happened, where the second unit has given such a lull with the way that they've had that, it's like the same thing, like you said, pre-planned 13 to 11 minute mark. We go 4 guys at least into the bench.
Mhm.
And I just don't see why you bother to do that, that way. I know you got to get the guys. I'm not saying like his argument's always like, well, I can't play him 40 minutes. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying be slightly more strategic. I don't see that there's a downside to it.
No, I mean, I think your point is somewhat valid in terms of like you could stagger it. It's almost like he doesn't want to go to his bench too soon, but then he doesn't want to stretch his starting lineup out too much. And the other thing is he's always kind of done this. And I'm not saying I agree with it. This has always kind of been his pattern is the first half he has, tonight it was, South Carolina, he only played 8. Tonight he played a 9th. Lane and Hatton had 3 minutes. They were all in the first half. It's like he kind of has a bit of a pre-plan in the first half.
Yeah.
And then the second half is a lot more, here's what's going on. Here's game state. Like I said, Bryson Tucker plays more minutes tonight than Mackenzie Mbako. I don't think that's because Mike Woodson was furious at Mackenzie Mbako. He just saw Mbako's not shooting the ball very well, just kind of couldn't figure out how to engage with the game offensively. And Tucker was playing really well at both ends of the floor. So the minutes go to Tucker. But I get your point. The one thing I would say about this game specifically is I would just be surprised if Indiana has this many nights offensively where it doesn't happen for this many players. And I think we're still seeing Indiana try to feel its way through what the dynamic is down low between Renew and Ballo. Those two are clearly trying to get some of that buddy ball going.
It's not in sync yet.
It's not.
They feel, and at times.
And it wasn't, the thing was, it wasn't with Kalel Ware last year. Ware was getting a few more points out on the perimeter, and Ware just had maybe a slightly more diverse offensive game. So Ware could go find his offense in other ways.
But I think Ware was more comfortable just sort of like working on the offensive. I mean, we've seen it. Like Ballo has been good from the final 4 minutes of games. Is like I feel like when all of the second chance points have come. And not earlier in the game. So it's weird. Ware was just more comfortable. I think more had a feel on the rim, by the rim. But I don't know. They're just not in sync yet. I mean, that'll probably come. I mean, I think it needs to, or you're going to have to start, changing some things around because offensively, the dynamic there is not great.
No, it's not. And tonight the dynamic just generally wasn't great. And Woodson talked about, he felt like they were making a bunch of passes that really, I think he said, like had no chance. Yeah. Their post entries again, that felt like maybe the post players not handling.
Yeah, Myles Rice had a bad one where it was just like he did it.
Well, but it was kind of like, I mean, it was one of those where the pass probably shouldn't be thrown, but the post player should probably have better position as well.
Sure,
like it's a bit on both. And I just felt like Indiana in the post, in the paint, did not have a great night with the physicality that UNC Greensboro was playing with. I think and the other part of it too is Indiana 5 of 19 from 3. That's a perfectly acceptable number of attempts. If they hit a couple more, they cover. And then it's sort of like, well, they didn't play great, but good, good teams win, great teams cover, whatever. I guess the way I would basically sum it up is you're allowed to have nights like this as long as you learn from them and they don't creep back up to you. It's not like last year where every single game in early November was like this. Like that was the problem last year, and that's what killed their efficiency metrics and just put them so far behind the 8 ball once they got to conference play. Now, obviously, Bahamas next. It's a big test. We'll learn a lot more. You're allowed to have a night like this every once in a while. You can't. These need to be learning moments, not habit-forming moments.
And I will say, as negative as I've been slightly more negative through the first 4 games than you have. I think Tucker is really impressive in the fact that we've seen the contrast between him and Mbako. The way Mbako looked in the first 2 months of the season is like the polar opposite of how Tucker looks. Tucker just looks like confident kid, has really heady, I feel like player, doesn't have sort of those jittery moments where Mbako kind of got lost on the court sometimes or did something where you'd kind of think like, whoa, where'd that come from? Tucker, sort of the opposite. I think I was typing it as you were tweeting it in terms of his mid-range, like coming off the screen, like pretty jumper, mid-range, like 10 to 12 feet, just really, really sharp. And then Myles Rice.
And that was his reputation as a recruit, like his mid-range offense.
And Myles Rice, I think, feels capable of being a sort of Big Ten Player of the Year talent. I think he's just struggled to sort of get everything together. But I mean, 20 points on a night where
20 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists.
And on a night where you don't even think, he's good in the first half, but okay in the second half, and it's kind of got lost.
If anything, I thought Indiana kind of lost its way when he wasn't on the floor.
Yeah.
And that's and again, that's one where you sort of look at Drake Galloway, and he had a quiet night, and
he did play 35 minutes,
so,
and it's sort of like, I just feel like there's so much potential there that once they get him and figure out sort of how this offense all looks together, that he will benefit from that as well.
And that's where I say I just don't think this team will have that many nights like this offensively. I think there's just too much scoring talent. There's still some things that need figured out. And again, it's fine if that's the case in November. Now you better be sharper in the Bahamas. You need at least a couple wins out there of reasonable quality. Obviously,
so we won't get to talk about the team before they go. So what's a good finish in 2-1? Have to be 2-1?
Yeah, I mean the problem is you just
because if you lose that second game, then you don't get a good third game.
Yeah, you don't know. I mean, you really probably need to beat Louisville to start. Like you just need to open with a win and give yourself the opportunity, presuming Gonzaga beats West Virginia is what I was trying to say. You need to start there, and then you probably, it does feel a little bit all or nothing, and you never know. Like you might play a team out there like Oklahoma or Louisville that actually, it turns out, we get to February and they outperformed expectations a little bit, and it's not like, oh my God, Indiana beat that team, but like it holds up as a solid quad one neutral site win all year long. They need to win at least 2. But it does kind of need to be against the right 2. It is not a requirement, but it would be an enormous. It's not like it's not an absolute requirement, but there is a vast difference between
so if they go
reassessing Bahamas with a win over Gonzaga or Arizona and reassessing Bahamas without one.
But if they go 2-1 and get like blown out by Gonzaga, that's not a good trip.
Probably not.
So they have a very thin needle to thread.
And that's we talked about this all offseason when we saw the non-conference schedule. That's what they left them with.
But it's hard because they're making, it's just based on all the other results too. So you can't really point,
and it's also like the way the field was built, and we've gone a little long here. We'll shut it down in a minute. But the way the field was built, it was kind of Arizona and Gonzaga at the top, and then Indiana and Creighton behind them, and then kind of everybody else, and then Creighton left, and they had to scramble to bring somebody else in at the back end. And so now there's not like another team kind of at Indiana's level of maybe like 30 to 60 in the Ken Palm range.
Because of chalk goes, and you don't get,
you could get like a good win that's not a great win, but again, like it's like if we just quickly go over to the Ken Palm numbers, like this is on air admin, but like Louisville's 61 right now. I forget exactly how this all goes. Providence is 73, West Virginia is 71. Obviously, Gonzaga and Arizona will help hold up, but like if any of those other teams, you're going to have to beat them and then hope
that they don't
they get up there a little bit and they just get kind of comfortably in that net range. Otherwise, you're going to have to do it all in conference play. I don't know. Maybe we get to conference play and we find out what we've kind of found out with football, which is with these enormous conferences, like it's all just kind of scattered all over the place, and you don't know exactly what you're going to get until you get there. But
do you think things will click into place for them? Do you think they'll play well?
I certainly think they can. I have not paid close enough attention to these other teams, to Gonzaga, to Arizona. I know Arizona obviously really struggled in that defensively, specifically in that loss at Wisconsin. That's probably a little bit of a reminder that like everybody's probably going through something like this right now. Like a lot of these teams were remade through the portal. Arizona certainly was. Yeah. Louisville obviously was. It's really easy to kind of get the 10-foot view of the team that you cover, or if you're a fan, the team that you follow, and forget that, you're only seeing the 10,000-foot view of everybody else. And if we were sitting here talking about Louisville or talking about Gonzaga, we might have the same conversations about them because it is just November. But the flip side is, this is the opportunity Indiana left for itself. Yeah. They beat South Carolina. They beat them comfortably. Good for them. They deserve whatever credit for that comes their way at the end of the season. But they built this non-conference schedule around making a lot of their hay in the Bahamas, and they better do it.
And you'll be there to cover it.
I will be there.
Well, enjoy.
I'll do my best. I'll raise a click on the beach to you. So he's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. One more time, Indiana 69, UNC Greensboro 58. Hoosiers are 4-0. Next stop, Atlantis.